First time I saw the wall, it wasn't from a distance. It was right in front of me, screaming at my face. 8 feet of steel, fresh and hot from the welders, rising like a prison gate across my own driveway. The sound of metal biting into metal filled the air, drowning out everything else. The birds, the wind, even the quiet that used to live here. Dust rose in a choking cloud, diesel smoke clung to my throat, and for a moment the ranch I'd built with my own hands felt like it had been erased. Standing beside that wall was Vivian Ashworth, the HOA president, smirking like she'd won a war. Designer heels sinking into my gravel, clipboard held high like a crown. She looked at me with the calm confidence of someone who believed the law was a weapon meant only for her. "Mr. Steele," she said, "your cattle ruin our elegance. This gate stays locked until every cow is gone." My 40-acre ranch, my family legacy, my only refuge after losing Sarah, had been fenced off in one arrogant afternoon. But while she was busy playing God, I wasn't helpless. I had already made a quiet, calculated move. I had bought the one property she never expected, the one piece of land that controlled the only entrance to her entire subdivision. And when she locked me out, I was already holding the key to lock her out too. My name is Garrett Steele. I'm a third-generation rancher in Clearwater Valley, Colorado. I'm 52 years old, with weathered hands that still reach for Sarah's coffee cup every morning, even though she's been gone for 18 months. She died of cancer, and the world I knew shrank down to this 40-acre spread. The smell of alfalfa, the rough feel of fence wire, the rhythm of cattle, these weren't just chores. They were the only things keeping me alive. This land wasn't just property, it was memory. My grandfather built every fence post by hand when the valley was still wide open and people respected each other. Then progress arrived, dressed as opportunity. In 2010, developers discovered our quiet rural setting and decided it needed improvement. Meadowbrook Estates sprang up around my ranch like a cluster of expensive weeds, 200 McMansions filled with people who wanted rural views without rural realities. There was a problem with their design, a single main entrance. The developer cut corners and funneled 200 homes through one access road. The road ran past a 2-acre plot owned by Frank Mueller, my grandfather's old drinking buddy, an old German farmer who understood strategic positioning better than most generals. 6 months ago, Frank decided to sell. He was too old for farming, and his kids had moved away. That's when I learned Vivian Ashworth had been circling his land like a vulture, trying to buy it through a shell company. Vivian Ashworth, 48 years of corporate law, wrapped in designer clothes and weaponized entitlement. She drove a white BMW that had never seen mud, and she carried her clipboard like it contained nuclear launch codes. But Frank's property came with something Vivian didn't expect, a legal bomb hidden in the fine print, an easement from 1962 granting exclusive control over the subdivision's entrance gate operations. Most people would miss it. Most people didn't know that old easement agreements recorded at the county level often supersede modern HOA covenants. After Sarah's medical bills taught me the cost of overlooking details, I learned to read contracts like a survival skill. While Vivian was busy filing harassment complaints about my cattle, I made Frank an offer he couldn't refuse. I paid him what she offered, and then some, enough to send him to Arizona in style. The satisfaction of outbidding a lawyer with her own tactics was a small joy, but it was a meaningful one. The deed arrived thick as a phone book, and buried inside was the phrase that changed everything. Exclusive right to control vehicular access, gate operations for Meadowbrook Estate subdivision. Suddenly, every resident's daily commute depended on my goodwill. Vivian had been targeting me since Sarah's funeral because nothing says community like attacking a grieving widower. She filed noise violations for roosters crowing at dawn, health complaints about agricultural odors, environmental threats from cattle near the creek. All nonsense, all calculated. Her real motive was money. My ranch sat on premium land worth millions. She had 4 subdivision properties in her investment portfolio, all leveraged on the assumption that values would rise if the unsightly ranch disappeared. When her brother-in-law, an environmental consultant from Boulder, produced a report claiming my cattle were contaminating the water, I realized how far she would go. It was fiction dressed in scientific language, and it gave her the ammunition she needed. The emergency HOA meeting was a formality. The board, hand-picked investors posing as concerned neighbors, voted unanimously. While I was at the Denver cattle auction, her contractors invaded my land. Power tools screamed. Steel posts rose. 8 feet of galvanized barrier, professionally installed, blocking my access completely. I came home to find my life imprisoned behind a steel curtain. Vivian stood guard like she'd conquered enemy territory. But she didn't know what I already had. While she was building walls, I had already bought the key to her front door. Vivian didn't waste time celebrating. Within 48 hours, she filed an emergency injunction claiming my cattle posed an imminent threat to 200 families. Her courthouse paperwork smelled like fresh toner and desperation, familiar scents by then. Her secret weapon was Dr. Bradley Ashworth, her brother-in-law, who produced a 20-page report about livestock contamination risks in record time. The science was fake, but it sounded real. Then she hired Blackstone Security Services. 2 guards in tactical gear patrolled my fence line 24/7. The boots crunched on gravel like an occupying army, because nothing says reasonable HOA enforcement like treating a ranch like a maximum security prison. One guard, Miguel, looked embarrassed. "We're just doing our job," he told me, voice low. "Ms. Ashworth pays overtime to document any suspicious agricultural activities." He wasn't proud of it. He just needed the paycheck. Then the social media war began. Hashtags spread like wildfire. Photos of my cattle drinking from the creek were captioned as environmental disasters. Neighbors who had bought my beef for years suddenly pretended not to recognize me. The school bus stop chatter turned awkward when I drove past. Even my veterinarian, Dr. Morrison, told me clients were asking if ranch contamination might affect their pets. Local Channel 7 took Vivian's bait. "Ranch operation threatens suburban community," they reported, primetime drama with dramatic shots of ordinary cattle doing ordinary things. Vivian stood in front of my fence like she was reporting from a disaster zone. "We are not anti-agriculture," she lied smoothly, "but public safety comes first." The lies were so polished, they almost sounded true. That's when I went serious. I spent days in the courthouse basement, surrounded by filing cabinets that hadn't been touched since the Carter administration. The musty smell of old documents mixed with bitter vending machine coffee. Hours of research taught me what Sarah used to say about fine print: the devil hides where nobody wants to look. I discovered the easement language was a masterpiece. Frank didn't just grant permission for access. He demanded operational control. The easement stated that the holder maintained exclusive authority over gate operation, scheduling, maintenance, and security. Every commute, every delivery, every emergency response depended on me. A yellowed newspaper clipping confirmed the irony. The developer had bragged about cutting infrastructure costs by funneling 200 homes through one choke point. That cost-saving design was now a legal trap. But Vivian's harassment kept building my case. Every complaint she filed created official records proving the subdivision's dependency on my ranch. The county had classified Meadowbrook Estates as rural residential because of my agricultural operation. Without active farming, the zoning would change and property taxes would skyrocket by 340%. Vivian was accidentally building my defense while trying to destroy me. Miguel, the guard, started sharing what he noticed. Vivian kept asking about alternate entrances and emergency routes. She drove around the perimeter constantly, as if searching for a way out of a prison she didn't understand. I smiled, let her keep searching. Then she escalated. Security cameras appeared around my fence like mushrooms, red lights blinking accusingly. The noise of motorized lenses tracking my cattle created a soundtrack of paranoia. My border collie Rex barked at the cameras like they were intruders, because they were. Then came the violation blitz. 47 infractions in 2 weeks, each carrying a $500 daily fine. Grass too tall, vehicles improperly parked, roosters crowing too early, agricultural equipment labeled unsightly. The fines piled up to $23,500 and climbing, threatening a property lien that could force me to sell. Vivian weaponized bureaucracy with surgical precision. The health department arrived unannounced, led by a nervous inspector. Vivian and her assistants followed, clipboards in hand, documenting every blade of grass like a crime scene. "This is absurd," Dr. Morrison muttered from her truck. "Your operation exceeds every standard. Those cattle are cleaner than most subdivision hot tubs." But absurd was Vivian's specialty. She carpet-bombed every government agency with complaints. Each agency required inspections and legal responses, draining my savings like a punctured water tank. Meanwhile, Vivian's private detective work grew desperate. She hired investigators, measured property lines, searched for alternate access routes. She was trying to eliminate the dependency she couldn't escape. But she was missing the one thing that mattered. The real power wasn't in the fence or the lawsuits, it was in the gate. And the gate's master key was in my pocket. One evening, I walked Frank's property and inspected the gate mechanism. The fancy electronic gate was just a facade. Hidden underground was a manual override controlled by a brass key, a small, unassuming piece of metal that controlled everything. The lights of the subdivision burned in the distance, families living their comfortable lives, unaware that their daily routines depended on my permission. Vivian drove past again, hunched over maps like a general planning an invasion. She didn't know the truth. She didn't know that the gate could be locked without her ever noticing. That night I opened Frank's property files. The documents were old, but they contained the truth. The 1962 agreement granted perpetual and exclusive authority over gate operations. The subdivision's existence depended on cooperation with my family, not permission from a board of entitled investors. County traffic records revealed the worst part. Meadowbrook Estates had 0 approved secondary access points. Fire and emergency services had complained for years about the single point of failure. Vivian had been trying to build a back entrance through wetlands. She didn't realize that environmental law doesn't care how rich or confident you are. When I tipped off the environmental office, the illegal construction was shut down in 2 hours, $47,000 in federal fines. The look on Vivian's face when she received the citation was panic, real panic. She was unraveling. Then the federal investigation began. Vivian's private investigators committed mail tampering. Federal postal inspectors got involved. That led to surveillance of her communications. The evidence revealed bribery attempts, environmental fraud, and a criminal campaign designed to destroy me. Her own recorded meetings became confessions. She had been recording HOA meetings to document her heroic efforts, but her recordings captured her plotting crimes. The federal case grew into a storm. Mail crimes, environmental violations, harassment, bribery, conspiracy. Her empire was built on borrowed money and suburban entitlement. The most devastating revelation came from her own words. "Do whatever it takes to eliminate the ranch operation. I'll cover legal costs when we get caught." She had created a confession without realizing it. By the time the federal agents were ready, she was already trapped in her own web. The stage was set. The gate was the key. And tomorrow, Vivian would learn what happens when someone mistakes noise for power. Thursday arrived with a chill in the air, the kind that makes your breath visible and your nerves sharper. Vivian's emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for 7:00 p.m., but the real event would begin 30 minutes earlier. Federal agents were ready. County police were positioned. Sarah Tatum from Channel 9 was set to document the entire evening. The stage was prepared for a lesson in power, one that Vivian didn't know she was about to learn. I walked to Frank's property carrying the brass key like it was Excalibur. The underground utility chamber felt cold against my palm as I opened it. The mechanism was simple, elegant, and deadly in its effectiveness. Turn clockwise to lock, counterclockwise to restore. No electronics, no passwords, no corporate control, just mechanical authority that had survived 6 decades. Rex followed me, calm and alert. He understood what was coming. At exactly 6:30 p.m. I turned the key. The gate didn't slam shut. It simply stopped responding. The electronic system died, and the gate settled into a locked position with the quiet confidence of a final decision. At 6:34 p.m. the first car arrived. A Mercedes, a Tesla, a minivan, a pickup truck. The drivers pressed their remotes, cursed, and stared at the gate in disbelief. Within minutes, the road filled with vehicles, a perfect line of suburban impatience stretching back like a parade of trapped privilege. By 6:45 p.m., 47 cars were backed up along the access road. Horns began to sound. People stepped out of their vehicles, confused and angry. They had never experienced anything like this. They didn't realize that their entire lifestyle depended on a neighbor they had been trying to eliminate. At 7:00 p.m., Vivian's meeting began inside the clubhouse with only 18 attendees. The rest were stuck outside, unable to access the parking lot. Inside, Vivian began her presentation about emergency measures and community protection, unaware that her audience was shrinking by the minute and that the real emergency was already unfolding outside. At 7:15 p.m., I arrived at the gate with Frank's deed and the brass key. County Traffic Engineer Bill Santos stood nearby, looking at the backed-up line of vehicles with a mixture of anger and resignation. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced, voice carrying over the crowd, "I'm Garrett Steele. I own the property that controls this gate through a legal easement established in 1962. The silence was immediate. People stared, stunned. "You can't just lock us out," someone shouted. "I can," I said, holding up the deed, "and I can also explain why you've been living in a lie." Engineer Santos confirmed my authority. "Mr. Steele holds the original easement. The subdivision was approved with his family's cooperation, not their permission." The truth hit them like cold water. At 7:20 p.m., I turned the key counterclockwise. The gate hummed back to life. Cars moved forward, flowing through the entrance like water breaking a dam. The lesson was over. The demonstration had worked. But the real climax was inside the clubhouse. Vivian was mid-sentence when Detective Ray Morrison entered with federal arrest warrants. The room froze. The air seemed to thicken. "Vivian Ashworth," he said, "you're under arrest for mail tampering, environmental fraud, bribery, harassment, and conspiracy." Her face went pale. Her mouth opened, then closed. The handcuffs clicked with the sound of a verdict. Her protest sounded like a desperate woman clinging to a story that no longer existed. She tried to claim rural conspiracies, federal overreach, and protecting families. But the evidence was too strong. Her own recordings had become her downfall. Federal agents led her past the gate, handcuffed and defeated. The crowd outside watched in stunned silence, the same people who had been cheering her attacks for months now witnessing her collapse. Ellen Martinez, a retired teacher who had opposed Vivian from the start, stepped forward. "Maybe it's time we learn to be actual neighbors," she said, voice steady, "not entitled occupants." The applause that followed wasn't just for me. It was for the end of a 3-month nightmare. The next day, the steel fence that had imprisoned my ranch was gone. In its place stood a simple wooden rail fence, boundaries without war. The ranch returned to its rhythm. Cattle moved freely, children laughed, neighbors began to talk again. Vivian's trial became a landmark case. She was convicted on 17 felonies and sentenced to 4 years in federal prison. She was ordered to pay $480,000 in restitution for the funds she had embezzled and the crimes she had committed. Her real estate empire collapsed. Foreclosure proceedings on her properties created affordable housing for families who actually wanted to live in a rural community. The new HOA board, led by Ellen Martinez, changed the rules. They created the Steele Ranch Agricultural Preserve, protecting the ranch operations forever. The environmental damage from the illegal wetland excavation required $230,000 in restoration. The Clearwater Creek Habitat Recovery Project became a model for repairing development damage. Miguel left private security and started his own landscape business. His daughter Sophia received the first Sarah Steele Memorial Scholarship for agricultural engineering. And Dr. Morrison, she and I married the following spring, on the ranch, surrounded by neighbors who had learned the difference between community and control. The gate became a symbol of cooperation. Frank's brass key was displayed in the community center as a reminder that real power isn't about building higher fences, it's about controlling the gates that let people in. And when people asked me what I learned, I told them the truth. The most dangerous kind of power is the kind that pretends it's justice. And the most powerful kind of revenge is the kind that teaches a lesson without destroying what you love.